SPACE, like you said, stands for Supportive Parenting of Anxious Childhood Emotions. And sort of the tagline I always start with, because it is such a good kind of explanation, is that it's the only evidence-based treatment proven to decrease childhood anxiety by only working with parents.
Welcome to OCD Whisperer podcast. Today with me, I have Robin Eisman, who's a licensed therapist and anxiety expert certified in SPACE, which stands for Supportive Parenting of Anxious Childhood Emotions. And Robin specializes in working with parents of anxious kids. Welcome to the show, Robin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I reached out because I personally was seeing you online, and I saw so many different posts about, kids, right? And I recognized, so I did a training in SPACE. So I recognized that and thought, oh my gosh, this would be a great conversation. Mm-hmm. So maybe we can start with just like basics, like what is SPACE really? How does this work? What's the protocol? If you can give us a little background.
Yeah, and I can kind of talk about this forever, so I will just start, and you let me know if you want to pause me at any point. So SPACE, like you said, stands for Supportive Parenting of Anxious Childhood Emotions, and sort of the tagline I always start with, because it is such a good kind of explanation, is that it's the only evidence-based treatment proven to decrease childhood anxiety by only working with parents. So it really is a model for parents. It is a actionable protocol, which I really like. And it's actually completely not my style in terms of therapy. Like I've been working in the field for over 10 years. I've had lots of individual clients. I've worked with kids and teens and adults and families. And usually I'm much more fluid. And with SPACE, I really follow the protocol, and I can go into what that is now, or we can wait.
But yeah, let's dive into what is that?
So what you do is you really first start with a very clear explanation of what anxiety is. And the way I explain that to parents, because a lot of parents come to me and they feel like we know what anxiety is. Like they've either done, had their own therapy, their kids have been in therapy, they've done other courses, read books. Or it's just in general, people are talking about anxiety a lot right now. So they feel like, okay, I know what anxiety is. But what I explain to parents from the very beginning is we are going to review every piece of vocabulary through the SPACE lens. So I don't want you to be thinking about anxiety the way you've always been thinking about it. I want you to be thinking about it through the SPACE lens. It was created by a person named Ellie Leibowitz, and it was out of Yale. And there's a lot of evidence-based. It is evidence-based, and there's a lot of research that backs how we are viewing anxiety and understanding it. And so when I start with parents, I really have to slow us down, which, as a therapist, people come to you and they want help. And you really have to be confident enough to say, I promise you this has real potential to help you, but I can't hand you on day one like a magic wand.
Yes.
So, and that's one of those things, like when you first become a therapist, that kind of, it lives in you. It's that kind of inner conflict where you always want people to walk away with what they need, especially when they're there to help their kid. But with SPACE, I really encourage slowing down. And so we start with education around what anxiety is, how we are going to understand it together, because we have to understand what's happening for the child biologically and in their brain with their anxiety in order to approach it. And then the other thing we really have to understand that SPACE does a beautiful job explaining is that anxiety is interpersonal. So anxiety between a parent and a child, it is an interpersonal in their relationship. It lives between them. So we aren't sitting here being like, here are tips for you to teach your child how to decrease their anxiety. We are educating parents how their behavior exacerbates, or at least does not decrease, or keeps alive the anxiety that exists between the parent and child. So we educate on anxiety being interpersonal, which is a very unique piece of evidence, because there's not a lot of places where you can really say that. You can say no, this isn't about this person or this person. This is about the relationship. And so we have to educate from the beginning. You have to kind of understand that pillar before you go forward, because all the work is me kind of going back to parents and saying, okay, but what are you doing? How are you participating in the anxiety? Because what we do is we explain what anxiety is, we educate on the interpersonal nature, we talk a lot about boundaries and what kind of ways that parents are not really being individuals and allowing their kids to be individuals. And then we talk about what an accommodation is. The whole piece about space is focusing on how are parents accommodating their child's anxious emotions. And that includes many diagnoses. It includes selective mutism. It includes separation anxiety, OCD. It includes generalized anxiety, social anxiety. So there's a lot of ways that this comes up. And parents are often good parents accommodate. Good parents are wanting to love their kid, help them be comfortable, help them feel heard. And so we end up accommodating our kids' anxious emotions and anxious behaviors. And then what we've learned from evidence is that that exacerbates the anxiety cycle. So we educate parents on what even is an accommodation. What does that mean? And then we take that understanding and we explore their whole day and their whole week. And we make a map of all the accommodations the parents are doing. And that work is really about, it's a dance, because you're really saying to parents, like, okay, this is what you're doing. This is what you're doing. And people are very used to coming to therapy and telling me how their kid is.
Yeah.
So usually when you say, how's it going? You say, oh, my kid is like this, or my kid feels like this, or we have this behavior. And I always say, okay, and what did you do? How did you respond? What are you doing in this relationship? And so the map, what I love about it and what is unique is it's all about the parents. It's about the parents' accommodation. It doesn't say, Johnny won't go on the bus. It says mom drives Johnny to school so he doesn't have to go on the bus. So it really takes the role from the parent. And then we explore that whole map. We do the whole thing. Like it's a lot. Usually there's a lot of accommodations going on. There's usually a lot of accommodations that people don't even realize. Explaining what an accommodation is complicated at first. And also people don't always see where they end and where their child begins. And so because of that, it takes a little bit to realize like what's an accommodation and not just like a behavior that you're just randomly doing. So you really sit and say, okay, what is an accommodation? It's something that's anxiety related. It's something that you can't just stop doing because you're afraid of how the child would respond. So there's questions to assess whether or not something's an accommodation. And then you pick one of those behaviors at a time, and we call them targets. And we decide which one are you going to focus on first, which one's meaningful, recurring, and then we make a plan around it. And my favorite part of the space plan around targets is the part that says, what will we do instead? A lot of times when therapists see parents, they'd say, okay, just stop doing this or just try doing this. But we really walk through like okay, you're not going to lay with your kid until they fall asleep at bedtime. What are you going to do instead of that? And we walk through the whole thing.
Well, I'm listening to you and I have so many different thoughts, but I'm also just kind of like, like I'm getting absorbed in the whole process, right? Because, so there's a couple of different things. One is, I love the depth and the breadth of exploring accommodation, right? Because when you really think about accommodation, it's not like it's all bad. So it's really understanding. I mean, and we accommodate each other. Just like reassurance is like this bad word in OCD or anxiety. It's like, look, we do provide some reassurance. We do offer some accommodation because that's just human nature, right? But really exploring when are we doing it for what purpose? That does require slowing down. And really, essentially, we're talking about building awareness, that increased understanding to really take a closer look at, is this really, I mean, yes, it's from a place of love, but really right now, is it more that like I'm uncomfortable because my kid is uncomfortable, or I don't know what else to do, so I'm just going to do this because we just need to get going, right? Those are the kind of things I hear. So, what that leads me to, and kind of, what I was mulling over in my head too, is all the times that parents really struggle with, when their kid just will refuse to, get ready, or suddenly have a meltdown, or especially anger, right? I think especially anger feelings or anything that's really big emotionally is
Yeah.
something in general as humans we don't do well.
Yes.
And so, how to then kind of think through this from the space lens of,
Hmm.
because like you said, this is actually not about saying, hey, let's keep focusing on the kid, which is quite often what does happen is,
Right.
oh, the kid is the problem. Fix the kid, right? And to
Yeah.
your point, like, yes, day one, there's these big expectations of somehow you're going to magically, miraculously cure all this in 1 to 2 sessions and just give me the thing I need to do. But the thing also didn't happen overnight. So we as humans don't work that way.
Yeah.
We're not robots,
Right.
right? So
Exactly.
I guess if, and I'd love to hear whatever else you have to finish with that point, but also, that's kind of where my mind keeps going is,
Yeah.
okay, if I understand these pieces and I'm the one as a parent that has to really stop and reflect for myself, how am I contributing to this? I guess if we can kind of switch into, well, what would somebody do as a parent, or what would you suggest, or to think through,
Yeah.
especially when you're having kids that are having meltdowns or anger outbursts, um, and what,
Yeah.
what do you do with that?
So it fits in perfectly to actually what I was kind of saying about the arc of space, because what you're talking about is typically what the response I get. Most parents who come to me don't believe me that this is going to help them, like, because they've tried so many things, and their kid has gone to therapy for weeks and weeks and months, sometimes years. They've taken other parenting courses. That, it's really difficult to trust that something could shift things. So it takes a level of saying, okay, we're going to try this thing, and we have to um, trust this process a little bit. And the reason I point that out is because because often the first questions I get are what you're saying. So when you tell someone, okay, you're just going to do this, you're going to decrease your accommodations, their first thought is, okay, and then my kid's going to throw something at me, or my kid's going to hit me, or they're going to yell, or they're going to refuse to go to school. Like, usually the whole reason the accommodations came around in the first place was to solve a problem. And so if I'm telling you to take away the accommodations, of course, the parent brain is going to say, okay, then the problem's just going to come back.
Right.
So your questions are completely natural, and we get them all the time, I think, as providers in this scope. So what I would say is there's a couple of things I want to say. One is I sit with parents. Another way I sort of slow us down a little bit is I don't answer I will go on with what space is to address exactly the question you're saying in terms of strategy. But before we do that, I really sit with parents and I say, I understand that this problem existed and that the accommodations were a solution for this problem at the time. But if we keep accommodating, we are affirming to this child's anxiety that this is the only way this problem can be solved. So that anxiety or anxious emotion or behavior has become affirmed over and over and over again, which makes it solid. It makes it loud. It makes it act out. It's like we have taught this child's anxiety that the only way we can help it is by accommodating it. So we don't have to believe, we have to kind of trust that there is an element where that was part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm saying, yes, there might be, an uprising of anger or other behaviors, but we are removing part of what has been the problem, because when we teach accommodations, we teach the accommodation cycle. And we know that the cycle, when you have a symptom of distress, any kind of symptom of distress, then the first thing that happens is an accommodation, a parent accommodation. And then it offers a short-term relief. And that relief tells the child's anxiety, the only way that we can feel better is by doing this accommodation. And then there's a continued dependence on that accommodation, and the cycle continues. So if we don't break it right here where the parent accommodation is, we are part of the cycle. So I'm kind of saying to parents, of course we're scared and of course we're worried, because if it was that easy, you would have done it already.
Right.
And there are strategies that we're going to use to do these things, but you also have to accept that you're part of the problem. And if you got to have, and that's why I called it a dance, because I'm very direct and I work hard to form the relationships with my clients so that I can say those things. So I can really say, like, part of you being here is accepting that. And I'm very clear about that in my intake calls. Like, this is about you. This isn't about your kid.
Well,
So
if I can jump in, I mean, this reminds me, and I don't know the exact research, but I did just recently see it again, that babies, even when they're little, how much their emotional regulation is dependent 100% on the adult in the room. And that when you are calm and when you are present and you're there, then you see how the babies act, right? They're acting from a place of safety. They're exploring, they're curious, they're laughing. The moment you introduce something else where something else starts to happen, literally within seconds, that baby starts to dysregulate, they pause, they might freeze, they might act out a little, but there's a very direct correlation. It's not like one thing is independent of another. And we know this already, that babies like to develop, to grow. So if you just even extrapolate from that, it's not like that stops, right? That continues.
Of course. So what we do is, so first I sit with people and I really validate the worry and the fear. Like, even the questions you ask, those are questions we get. And I validate that those questions are very normal and very common. And I've answered them many times. And some of it is trusting the system, and some of it is accepting responsibility of changing the system in your home. So you're part of that system. So we have to acknowledge that, like, we are part of the system. That's why the anxiety being interpersonal is so important. I slowed us down too, because I have to slow down the client, because if they say, okay, but why will it work? What happens if my kid does X, Y, Z? And I just said, oh, okay, you're just going to say these 3 things. It wouldn't be doing justice to the process, because you have to really understand that you're learning a new language, you're learning a new behavior, you're really changing something that inside of you. And most parents, we're old dogs learning new tricks. So it's hard. It's hard. And it's a hard thing. And so I say, this is a new language. You're learning we're going to sit with the discomfort around this. And part of the work, depending on the parent, is to also talk about their own regulation and their own skills. So some parents come to me with their own therapists already, so they work on that there. Some parents, I'll pause and sort of say, can we talk about what you do when you're dysregulated? Because this will happen while you're in this work. So that's all really part of the work when we talk about what we're going to do when their kid acts out. The other thing I educate parents on is that I am not teaching you this so your kid does not act out. I am telling you your kid is going to act out. Anxiety acts out. OCD acts out. It does it because it's keeping you safe. It thinks it's keeping you safe. And so it's telling you, and it's telling everyone in the room, we have to listen to it or we are not going to be safe.
Right.
And it is 100% normal and expected that if you take away an accommodation, your child is going to be upset. So I also set the expectation that your kid is going to be angry, sad, shut down. And we talk about all the ways they might respond. And it's not like when you say, oh, how did it go if they decrease an accommodation? And they say, oh, it didn't work because they got upset. I say their upsetness has nothing to do with if it worked. If it helps, it's did the parent feel more confident? Did they feel more comfortable setting the boundary or decreasing the accommodation? Did the, acting out, was it shorter? Was your kid able to reflect on it? Like, there's a lot of ways we can kind of see if it helped, but that's an over the time conversation. We don't base our progress on a child's emotional response.
Right.
And that's a big one. We don't get stuck in that, because that goes back to what you said, where if we're constantly responding to our child's emotional response, that is just a cycle we don't want to be in. Like, that is just very difficult for everyone. But to go back to the space process, because it answers your question, is I said the part of the plan that I really like is what do we do instead? So we make a plan like, if you're not going to lay with your child, we come up with an alternative plan for bedtime. But then we do something called stress testing, which is another part. There's so many parts of space I just love so much. But this is another part that's very unique, which is you actually talk through your fears. So we have one column that says, what I'm afraid my child's going to do. And the other column is, what am I going to do? And that is not something, I don't know about you, but personally, until I did space, I didn't sit and fill out charts with people about this. Like I would talk about it. I would say, okay, what are you going to do when you get upset? Or what are your coping tools? Or, but to sit down and really talk through those fears and like the fears you asked about, like what happens if my kid gets really angry, or it is so helpful because parents get an opportunity to ask those questions. I'm not brushing over those questions. I'm leaning into those questions. I'm saying, tell me all your fears. And when I say that, what happens is one, they get to address them and we talk about the call of what to do. So that's one part, which I'll get to. But the other thing that happens that I notice a lot is they start to realize their fear is their anxiety and not necessarily rational. Like it's not necessarily what they really think is going to happen. It's what they're afraid of happening. So a lot of times it's really interesting. A lot of times after I do the stress testing, people are like, oh, actually, I'm not worried about that anymore. Like they kind of talk through what it was stuck for them. And then,
well, we're talking about that emotional regulation, right? Again, back to what we were saying earlier. Most humans are not well trained, or we don't cover this kind of stuff, right? Where we are able to understand the emotion or understand the fear of what could be and might be and how paralyzing that can be. And then of course there's every parent wanting to, naturally just wanting to protect their kids. And, and there really is a different learning that takes place of what does that actually look like when you're dealing with anxiety or OCD, right? Because it's going to be a little different than a kid who doesn't have OCD, but, maybe has some other stuff going on.
Definitely. So we have an opportunity to sit with that. We don't just say, oh, okay, if you're afraid, take deep breaths or something like that. We sit with all the fears. And then to get to I've like now not answered the question for long enough. So I'll tell you. One is something I actually skipped over, which I did not mean to, is called supportive language in space. So supportive language we teach really early on because it was shown to be so effective. And it's the combination of validating your child and believing in them. So it really takes the opportunity to say to your child, I see your fear, I see what's going on here, and I still believe in you. And that lets them know and lets the anxiety on their shoulder know we don't have to keep acting out. They saw us. They saw what we're doing. They saw that they need to help us feel safe. And when you say you believe in your child, the anxiety has this opportunity to say, oh, they see us and they believe in us, which means they must think we're safe. So there's this way where the anxiety can kind of quiet down. So when we go to do that chart, we use a couple key approaches. So one is called delayed response. They're all literally called what they are. So one is called delayed response, which is to literally delay your response. There's a ton of evidence, like we keep talking about with dysregulation. There's a ton of evidence that shows the more you get engaged in the chaos, the more chaotic things become. So basically, we are saying every time your child says, well, what if this, or what are you going to do about this, or gets mad, you don't have to respond. Their emotion is not something you always have to respond to. So there's first just delaying. I always say to parents, if you feel like it's too ignory, like too much, like you're just not responding at all, that's when I say a supportive statement once, like acknowledge that you heard them. But that's more honestly for the parent because they feel weird not responding. So say a supportive statement, delay your response. Then another kind of layer is this would be disengagement, which is just kind of full, like I'm gonna remove myself from the situation. I'm not gonna respond. to the loop or the anger. I'm not going to yell back. And we write that out. We say, Dad is not going to yell back. Mom is not going to negotiate or fill in the silences. So disengaging is, we know that the more no matter what, if you participate, they have you on the hook. So you have to really be like, I see that you're anxious and I believe in you and I'm right here, but I'm no longer engaging with your anxious voice. I'm now focused on you as as my child, not your anxious voice. Because when you're collaborating with an anxious child, you're collaborating with their anxiety.
Yeah.
You're not saying, oh, I have to listen to this and engage in this negotiation, because that would be with the anxiety, not with your child. The anxiety is really loud. So that's taking over.
And I love that separation and externalization, because even in OCD
100%.
work, one of the things, if you're using more ERP or ACT-based strategies, is to externalize it, right? Like, let's name it, maybe even draw it or find a representation, so that we can create a little bit of that distance and essentially help us relearn how to interact with that part of ourselves, right? It's still part of us, but how can I have a new relationship with this thing? So I love hearing that as well, right? It's like, let's create a little bit of that separation and space, because sometimes too, I've certainly heard parents sometimes conflate and not realize, like, this isn't your child. They're dealing with this anxiety or OCD issue that is difficult. It's not like this is something they're intentionally on purpose doing. So let's create that separation, right? So that we learn how to treat that differently than, here's my child that, I love and cherish, but then here's this thing they're dealing with.
Yeah. And it's really also an opportunity to remind parents that you're not abandoning them and you're not, just not caring about them or ignoring them. You actually are loving them and taking care of them and supporting them by not accommodating their anxiety. And so when you say, I see you through the fog of anxiety, and so that's why I'm not accommodating you. It's not because I don't love you. It's I see you. And something else that we talk about in space is parental unilateral action. So we make decisions without asking the child, like, do you want me to stop laying with you tonight? Bedtime is a very common one. That's why it always comes to my head. But do you want me to stop laying with you? No, we don't ask them, because sometimes what will happen is kids will say yes. And then right as bedtime nears, anxiety will peak and they'll say, never mind, never mind, never mind. And so we have this unilateral action. We have this, like, parents see the big picture. Our brains are fully developed. We're not the anxious kid. And so we are making the decision. We're not collaborating. So there are times where we delay response and we disengage, and we sometimes, if we go further in this, it's always safety first, but we go further and there's distancing. So, like, if your kid is old enough and safe, can you, like, go sit on the steps? Can you take a walk? Like, because sometimes when we're there, we are actually making the emotion bigger. So sometimes taking some space is good. Sometimes I teach parents to tap in and out. Like, one parent is often more triggering than the other. So, like, you can take turns, which is a big part of this work. And then for true safety concerns, there's something called a sit-in, and that is laid out really well in the manual and in the book that Ellie Leibowitz wrote. And it really is something to consider, because even when you do have these big fears, there's an approach that we could take to support the kid and to decrease accommodations, but we always care about safety first. So there are a bunch of different ways that we talk about, and I go like this because it's the right side of the column. There's a bunch of ways things that we put in there.
And I love that, because there's actually a lot in what you're saying, and there's a lot of examples, and I really hope that people listening today, that they recognize that there is a lot you can do, but instead of rushing through it, let's act, like you said, slow down and really kind of, what therapists are trained to do, and through this process they're teaching you to do, is how to effectively really assess and analyze, and then have a plan and then go execute, and really again, separate that, something that's effective is not based on your child's emotional response. The feelings come and go, and that's not the
Yes.
barometer we're looking at.
Right.
And that essentially when you're starting to change your behavior, what I love too, and what I've learned is that you're giving your kid an opportunity to actually get better and stronger. And the reality is they can, and they do.
They do.
Lo and behold, on their own, they actually figure it out. But it is, it could be a little uncomfortable because you have to,
Yeah.
be a witness really to seeing them struggle a little bit. And I think that's a part that's also really hard just as a human being. Whenever you have to witness somebody else struggling in that way and you see they're hurting, of course it's going to pull on your heartstrings. But then when you really understand the bigger picture with anxiety, like this is actually how you're going to help them get stronger and develop these inner tools that they get to have for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. It really is. It's just this is what's hard for me. Not hard, but what happens is people come and it's so hard, and it really kind of turns things on its head. We're asking people to look at things very differently. I see it as the most beautiful thing. Like I see decreasing accommodation as love. I see it as goodness, like as believing in your kid. People will say like, "Oh, will this hurt like my attachment, or will this hurt?" And I just see it as so the opposite. Like I see it as this like security because you're believing in your child, but you're still there. You're still showing up for them. You're not, and you're even, I also really encourage people, and this is something we learned in the trainings, is to really emphasize that like this is you as a parent doing work, when until now you most likely were asking your kid to do the work. Usually we send the kid to therapy. And so it's a really beautiful way to show love and care for your kid, to say, I'm taking time out of my day, I'm spending resources so that I can learn how to support you, be able to like do all these things.
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't think, will the kid get it right now? No, they're not supposed to. This is the long game. We're not like, they're not gonna be like, thank you so much for going to therapy for me. I mean, maybe some kids do that, but it's not super common. But seeing this as a way of nurture and love and support, I think is really, really beautiful. And then the last part of space that I think is also all the parts, honestly, I feel are pretty unique. But this part I really like also, which is called the announcement, which is that we don't just do all this in secret. We tell the child, and we package it with being proud of them and supportive statements. But then we specifically say, I see that this is something that makes you anxious. And I notice that when I do this, it doesn't help you be less anxious. So I'm going to now do this. And you say that to them. And they can, just like when you decrease the accommodation, kids also react to the announcement, not always favorably. Yes. But it's such a point of respect to them to say, I'm not doing this in secret. Like I'm telling you that I noticed something that I'm doing is not helping you. And so I'm going to do the hard work to stop. And you don't have to do anything differently. You don't have to, I'm not saying you have to do, I'm trying to think of all the things. Like, I'm not saying you have to go here or go to school on time or take the bus or anything. I'm telling you what I'm going to change. And then as me not changing it, it gives them an opportunity to develop a skill that they haven't been able to develop yet.
That's right.
So we tell them, and we do it so lovingly. It's like, so love, it's all full of love. Like it's very beautiful. And I think that's when there's a misconception. I think that decreasing accommodations is automatically like this tough love. If you were in my sessions, I mean, it is the most like fluffy loving. Like we are so soft. We're softies, but we're just soft in a different way. We're just trying to say, but I believe in my kid and I want them to be able to flourish. And it's just different. And so it's interesting because that's a real misconception, I think, especially when I do my reels online, because they don't always land for people, because people think it's like I'm taking away all these accommodations and just that's it. But no, there's a whole loving process that happens.
Well, of course, it's kind of like the concept. You're not always going to give your kid what they want all the time, right? If your kid just says, hey, I just feel like having candy morning, noon, and night, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I mean, is that realistically what you're going to do? No, you're going to have to say, like you said, right? You have a wiser, mature brain that's holding a much bigger picture of things that
Right.
your kid just isn't quite yet doing. So like this is why you're there to facilitate and help the process. So
Yeah.
that means sometimes you do have to say no with a complete love and care, but just the answer is still no.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
And in this situation, they're in on it. They might not be agreed, but they know what you're doing. They know
Right.
why you're doing it.
Right.
You're saying exactly, you're on a team. The way I phrase it to parents is like, you're on a team with them against their anxiety. That's a
Right.
big, I don't know if you know Lynn Lyons, but she's like my first anxiety guru before space existed. And she talks a lot about that, a lot about being on a team with your child against the anxiety.
Exactly.
And that's what space allows you to do. And so when you're saying no to them, it's for a purpose.
Exactly. And you're not, again, nothing. And I've seen this and just through my own experience, it shouldn't be a surprise. And it's not it's not a punishment. It's just like you said, it's just saying, hey, listen, I'm noticing now that this actually isn't helping the situation. So since I have control over me, here's what I'm going to change. And then,
Right.
we'll see how things go.
Right.
But again, kids are so resilient. And lo and behold, when we get out of the way, suddenly with a little time, there's
mind blowing.
It is mind blowing.
Mind blowing. So I worked with anxiety for a long time. And then I noticed that when I worked with kids and teens, I had to work with parents because obviously I was like, okay, this is important. And I would touch on what now I would call an accommodation. I would walk them through it. But when space came in front of me, someone like mentioned it, I was like, what is this? And I looked into it. I was like, this is what I've been looking for my whole career because I was like, this is a tangible, evidence-based protocol that I can teach to people that is exactly that. It's saying, get out of your kid's way. Like you're in the way and you have to get out. And it does it loving and compassionately and all of that. And I was like, I'm really excited about this. I'm going to go all in. But what really has kept me going all in is the results.
Yeah.
Like watching over and over again how parents after like one or two accommodations are coming back and saying, my kid's no longer having a tantrum. My kid's sleeping alone at night. My kid went back to school. My kid joined a new hobby. My kid, like and I sit there like, whoa, really? Like every time I'm like, is this real? Like but every time, and I say that to the parent, I'm like, I really believe this. And every time I am so blown away. Like,
I love that.
And I just love it. And I love how you can see the evidence even when they don't get to the target yet and they just start using supportive language because they're valid, because it's a whole new way of talking to your kids. So they're validating them and they're believing in them and they're doing this and they'll come back even before the targets start and they'll be like, my kid is sleeping alone now and I don't know what I even did. And I'm like, yeah, because you stopped being in this loop with them and you kind of step back and you just started having this whole energy shift of I believe in you.
Yeah.
And when we do everything and we accommodate them, we're sending a message, I don't believe in you.
Yeah.
You can't be okay without me.
Yes.
And that is a very difficult message. And especially right now, I'm on my real, like, whatever word, I don't know what word this is, but I'm on a mission, I think, with a lot of people online and in my real life too, of also realizing how smartphones affect all of this, because we are with our kids all the time when we're tracking them. And I have kids, like all these teens that text all day from school, but I'm coaching parents how to not answer the texts all day. Like there's a parent role in it. And so right now in 2025, this is also very relevant. Like we have to get out of the way.
Yes.
Like we're in the way.
Yes. Yes. Robin, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about this. So if anybody would like to find you, how can they find you?
So I am on Instagram, Parenting the Anxious Child, and my website is theanxiouschild.com. And I'm actually in May launching a membership where it's going to be a monthly membership with videos that cover space and a couple other best practices of work parenting an anxious child. And it's going to come with monthly office hours. So I've been posting about that a little bit here and there too. So I definitely want people to pay attention to that because I think it'll be a really good way if you're sitting there saying, my kid doesn't need therapy necessarily, but I really need support, but I don't it's really hard to access a therapist right now, I think this is going to be a really good way to get some coaching around parenting your anxious kid.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Robin.
Thank you.